Okay.
And we're back. So, Ellen, go on with the McCarthy hearings and just what you thought about that.
Um,
Now
okay, now I can talk. um, just as I had said earlier that he had brought, his interests were became important in the family, and you know, his sharing his interests, the interest in politics, what was going on in the world. I do think that even though I didn't understand what the McCarthy hearings were all about, it didn't make me a whole lot of sense that they were called the Army McCarthy hearings. And I couldn't get how is the Army involved in this and everything. But it was the start, I think, of my interest in the political world. Uh, Jim has always been instrumental in giving me a lot of background and information, and and it has become a big interest of mine. So
why do you think he had such a passion for being involved in politics just overall?
Why do you think he had such a passion for being in politics overall?
I think our parents were they from my mother actually before Roosevelt, but Roosevelt was such a big thing in our family, and to be interested in what was going on in the world. My dad was. Neither one of these people passed the 8th grade in formal education. Neither my mother or father, but they were very aware of what was going on. It was very important, for instance, for my dad to read the Journal Gazette, which was the Fort Wayne morning paper, every day. I mean, this was very important to him. This was part of his day. And so they were very well informed about what was going on in the world. And even to the point that during World War II, my mother believed everything that was said about what was going on with the Holocaust, even though people around her said, there's nothing to that. They're lying. That can't be happening. And she said, yes, it is. She was just very aware of things like that, and my dad too. So I think that was probably the start of it. But he also had a teacher in high school that was very influential. Was the person that talked him into applying to the University of Michigan, and was his government teacher in high school. And that teacher was very important to him. Mr. Wilson is his name.
Mr. Wilson. Okay. So
yeah, I had him too. And he actually said to me at one point, are you sure you're Jim Beatty's sister? Because I was not of Jim's caliber in his class. True. That's the truth.
So is there a story about Jim's high school graduation?
I think the whole graduating class came through our house between, the evening and 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And my mother made strawberry shortcakes for these people that came through our house. I slept through the whole thing. I saw the last straggling person leaving out our back door, walking across our backyard, and realized I had missed it all. But apparently his whole graduating class, which couldn't have been that big, but it was 1949.
Kind of speaks to Jim's popularity, though, if the entire graduating class went to your house.
Well, at least my mother thought the entire class had gone through because she had made so many. And she told me the amount of strawberry shortcakes that she had made, and it was a phenomenal hundreds. That night, all through the night, she had made these shortcakes.
Now, there's another note here about maybe him getting married and maybe you not being. What was the story about being mad and married?
How did you feel about when he got married
Oh.
to Phyllis?
Oh, well, I was mad because he had promised not to get married until he was and leave home, permanently leave home until he was 30. And I said, why is he doing this? He said he wouldn't. Anyway, yeah, so I was mad. I was miffed. But Phyllis won me over.
Why don't you talk about Phyllis for a little bit? What are some of your memories with Phyllis?
Oh, I have some great memories of her. Yeah, I've written about her because she was very important to me in my, from the time I was 14 on. I have such fond memories of her. We became, she became really important to me late after we both had children. And I started, spending a lot of time talking with her about everything. And we became very close. We had a little problem in our early years because of her faith, the importance of religion, her faith in her life. And I seemed to her to be I was a non-believer. And she was very worried about my soul and that I would not, be with her in the afterlife. And I said, well, we'll have to see about that, won't we? because in later years, after we'd had a lot more, I would say, experiences through our children, we became very good friends.
That's beautiful. So how would you describe
and
that?
we tolerated each other's beliefs very well.
So how would you describe Jim and Phyllis and how they treated each other?
How would you? Jim and Phyllis and how they were with each other?
Well, I I don't know how to characterize it really. I think they had a great, besides loving each other, I think they also had a great deal of respect for each other and for their differences. And and I always felt that nothing would really disrupt that, or I was very secure in my sense about them as a couple. Very, very secure. There aren't a whole lot of people I feel that way, but knowing each of them and they were distinctly different people, but I just knew that there was a something very abiding about their relationship. It was something that I admired, really, really admired.
All right, so this is jumping a little bit, but what about Jim's laugh?
Well, I can tell I can tell you one way to explain it. That it was very distinctive, very it really it was someone that you would recognize it. It was very distinctive. My sister went to the University of Michigan while he was still there. I think he was in law school at the time. And she said that she went to a movie and it was funny movie. And she said, "Oh my gosh, my brother's in this movie theater. I know he's here," because she heard him laughing. His laugh stood out above all the other people laughing at this movie. She said, "I heard him. There he was. And so I just remember her saying that. That.
Well, I'm sure that you got influenced a little bit about his musical taste. I know he started WTLC in Indianapolis, but as far as blues and jazz, what's some of your memories with that? Maybe even back being introduced to that in Arizona back in the 50s.
I went out to Arizona to help Phyllis after Jay was born. And I was 16, I think. And Jim introduced me to the blues. I had never listened to music like that. I was sort of into rock and roll and things like that, but then I heard the roots of rock and roll, by hearing the blues and have loved it ever since. He played it and he played it loud, and it was just, an very enjoyable time.
Do you remember some of the artists that he'd love listening to, that he'd expose you to, like specific musicians?
Jimmy Rushing, I remember, as a blues singer, Chicago blues. And a lot of the blues singers, that he really likes singers. He he still does. He will, you know, if you sit down and listen to music with him now, he will frequently play singers. It all started, I think, with Al Jolson back in the 1940s. His interest in singers, and yeah, Jimmy Rushing was one of my favorites that he introduced me to, of the blues singers. I never, he loved Sarah Vaughan, the jazz singer. I didn't understand the jazz as well as the blues. The blues is such an emotional music that gets to you, you know, emotionally. Jazz takes a little bit of thinking as well, and so I wasn't as taken at the time when I was young and into rock and roll and things like that, to people like Sarah Vaughan for singers and stuff. But but he, you know, but I appreciate her now. That, you know, I mean, I learned to appreciate some of the things that he was very up on long time ago.
So we're gonna switch gears a little bit. How would you describe him, and what are some of the memories of him becoming a parent?
Any memories of him becoming a parent?
And how, yeah, just how was he as a parent, and what are some things that really stand out?
Well,
Obviously, him as full, but go
my
ahead.
impression is he'd do anything for him.
Yeah,
He'd do anything for his kids. Really.
yeah, and as a parent of young children, extremely tolerant. You know, I mean, he could be in a room doing something and have chaos around him. I just marveled at him, you know, and he could, you know, the kids yelling or fighting with each other, everything. Now he says that isn't true, you know, that he would react, but I don't remember him ever, you know.
You know, it's funny. That's
Getting done.
that's my impression too of him when we would go for Thanksgivings and stuff. Jim had this desk in the corner of the family room, and then he had this wall of music along the side and a wall of books on the other side, and there was this big couch that was kind of like, so our back, if we were on the couch, our backs would be to where he was sitting at his desk, you know. And he would almost always be at that desk, like doing something. And he had the swivel chair so he could like spin around and look at his music and look at the books and look at his desk and like, you know, see the room, you know, from his corner. And I remember us, like when we would come over and there'd be all this activity in the house and there'd be people coming and going and having conversations on that couch or whatever. And Jim would just be a presence in the room, right? He'd be there. And then every once in a while interject something, or, you know, this sort of thing, or he'd, you know, out of the blue say, you know, like, hey, have you ever heard of this musician? And like, pull that record off the shelf and I'll like, let's listen to it or whatever. It would just, but it was like all this stuff could be going on around him and he was sort of doing his own thing in the corner. And then would kind of choose these moments every once in a while to like join in, you know, in a way. But that there was never, like, he wasn't a person that was like flying off the handle about things or ever asking us to be quiet or anything like that. You know, it was a very comfortable space, I guess, for kids.
When the kids were real small, he enjoyed them. You know, I mean, he liked watching them. He liked laughing at, you know, their antics, things they did. I went through a long period of time not being around him or Phyllis. You in my 20s, and so I can't really, when I paused before about him interacting with his kids, I know how he was, and how you know how enjoyable he was to be around his young children, because he was enjoying them so much. I don't know about so many years, because I was, off doing my thing somewhere else, and so I don't know. I just know he likes his kids. He really likes them.
Now, talking about politics for a second, you had the chance, I believe, as a summer job in '63 to work on the campaign for mayor for him. Why don't you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I was in college. It was my first summer off from college, and he invited me down to work in the office. He was the campaign manager of the mayor in the mayor's race for the Democratic candidate. And I believe this is, and I might be wrong, and because I think I spent 2 summers down there, and I'm not sure which one it was, but I do know that what was happening in the country was the March on Washington, Martin Luther King, and the March on Washington, and his speech at the Lincoln Memorial. And we watched it as, we were in the campaign headquarters, and I remember watching it on television, what was happening, in Washington.
So what about after?
I know that was 1963.
How about Thanksgiving after Kennedy was shot?
Yeah, that weekend was so awful for me, but I hadn't really cried until I saw Jim and Phyllis. They came in our house in Fort Wayne, and I just burst into tears, because I just felt that that Jim would understand how I was feeling. Really understand how I was feeling.
And you were able to spend some time probably at the beginning of some of those Saturday luncheons with all the different political people having conversations. What's some of your memories of the Saturday luncheons?
You want to talk about? Okay, hold on 1 second. Do you need to take your asthma medicine or something?
Here, maybe some water.
Running out of breath here. Need a minute. I can tell that you're getting a little tired.
No, I just needed that.
Well, I mean, just in how you're talking and stuff. It seems.
I don't feel tired, but
okay, good.
But that's because I enjoy talking about Jim.
So the Saturday lunches, why don't you talk about that a little bit? What do you remember about those Saturday political lunches?
Yeah, that the getting together with Jim to come, to see him in Indianapolis, and he, he once again, uh, invited us, it was, me and the kids, to come and make sure that we came on a Saturday so that we could go to one of these luncheons where he would get together with, the people that were in his circle, and they spend most of the time talking about politics at these luncheons. And I can't remember for sure when we started doing that, to make sure we came, when we go to visit them, to go on to be there on a Saturday, to have a chance to go see this group of people. But it was then that, as an adult, I got to know Jim better. I had missed a lot of years, with him, being around him a lot. But seeing him with these people that he enjoyed being with, was really one of the best experiences for getting to know him. And as well as, these neat people that he knew. I think that Katie feels the same way about, going to those luncheons and talking to these people. He has outlived many of the people that used to be there, but every one of them was an interesting person to get to know.
Okay, so lastly, you also visited him at the coffee house, probably down off of Pennsylvania.
That was truly enjoyable for me. I went to Indianapolis to stay a while with him. And this was in, like 2019 or some, it's not been that long ago. And he said he went to this coffee shop and he would meet with this group that just, would drop in to the coffee shop, and they would end up, sitting together and talking. And I just had the greatest time, doing this. I was so, it was something I really, really enjoyed. And he had this wide, range of people that, that would come and sit there and talk about what's going on in the world. And they were just, each one of them, such a different person from the other, so distinctive, and just truly enjoyable. There was even a Republican.
That's pretty funny.
A Republican that Jim was trying to convert. And I asked him recently, have you yet? I mean, given, the way things are, certainly you've convinced him by now. And he said, no, I don't think so. At least he's not letting on whether he had.
Okay, so now I'm going to switch it up a little bit to Lynn. So just in general, how would you describe Lynn and their dynamic of of daughter, father?
Devoted. I guess I'd put it in one word. I think I think mutual admiration, mutual admiration, the two of them, you know, really, I think, you know,
He also
Jim thinks she's fabulous, and she is, and uh, and and she thinks the same of him.
Okay, so here's a fun one. If both you and Jim were in perfect physical condition and you could go anywhere on the planet and do an experience with Jim, what would you want to expose him to and where would you go?
Well, since he's been almost everywhere, and it has said he's not going anywhere, I probably would just spend the time in his office with him. You know, I think we are very, we are different travelers. I mean, he and I think, you know, you know, he goes, I've seen that. He goes to another place. I've seen that. And I don't know that. I would just, wait a minute, slow down a little. No, I think that we just, you know, I enjoy the time with him. I have enjoyed the time down at the condo in Florida with him. I think, you know, a place where, you know, like that, where we would, you know, could walk out on the beach or something with each other if we were both in good walking condition, you know, and everything. Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, just a place to sit, listen to music, talk, reminisce.
That's beautiful. All right. So, in closing, what would you like to say to Jim directly?
He's been one of the most important people in my life. He's been my big brother in only the good senses of that expression. He's always had my back. And as I said before, he's never made me feel small. He's always made me feel I'm up to it, whatever I want to do. And it makes me feel, which I think he does for a lot of people, he makes me feel important to him. He makes me feel he likes me. And I think a lot of people feel that from him. And that's one of the reasons that he is so important to other people. Is he appreciates people. And I think he appreciates me.
That's beautiful. Is there anything else either of you would like to say in closing?
I'd like him to be around forever.
That's beautiful.
At least as long as I am around.
Well, I'm sure he wants the same thing, and you know he's still rocking right along. So he ain't done yet. That's for darn sure.
Okay.
All right, we'll just stay on the line. I'm going to close this out.